Hello, people. Andrew here, talking about comics from a reader, collector, speculator, investor point of view, in that order of importance to myself. And today I'm looking at part three of the Avengers West Coast or West Coast Avengers. This is the final part of the first series, which ran for 102 issues and had, eight annuals. And as I say, this is the third part, the final part. I've done another two videos on part one and part two. We finished off part two talking about John Byrne's run and how much I really liked John Byrne's run. And now we're going to continue on, as I say, for the end for 58 to 102. Now, it was primarily written by Roy Thomas and his wife, Danette. Oh, wait. She changed her name, legally, she changed her name to Dan. So it's Roy and Dan Thomas are primary writers on this block. There are some fill-in issues by a couple of other writers, but it's pretty much Roy Thomas and Dan Thomas's storyline. The art changes a couple of times. There's Paul Ryan, I believe it is. Yeah, Paul Ryan, and then there's Dave Ross. They do the bulk of the art chores, but there are other artists that contribute to an issue here or there, but it's primarily Paul Ryan and a lot of Dave Ross stuff. I'm not knocked out by either one of these particular artists. Actually, there's no artist on here that I am really knocked out about. But I will say that Dave Ross, at least the quality of his material seems to improve as he works longer and longer on the Avengers West Coast. One of the things to take into account for this particular series is also the timing. Sometimes I like to just focus on the story and focus on the artwork, and the politics behind it shouldn't affect the story, but it does affect the story a lot here because we have new owners running Marvel. It's Ron Perlman, who not the actor, of course, the business tycoon that is owned it. He doesn't like comics. He doesn't understand comics, but what he understands and what he puts into place to run Marvel is marketing and promotional executives, and they sort of take the ball and they try and run with that. So, and it's also a time of change when the top artists go out and from Marvel go out and form Image Comics. So there's a lot of turmoil going on and a lot of demands made by the various creatives that are still working at Marvel. And that does have an effect on what happens in the story. So we're starting off somewhere in the boom era because this is what, 1990, 1991, around there, which is 1990, 91, a very big boom area for the whole comic book industry. Marvel in particular is doing well with Spider-Man #1 doing like 1.5 million copies, and then X-Force with 5 million copies, and then X-Men with 8 million copies sold. Speculators were big on the market. They were buying hundreds of copies of these books, looking for new issues, things like anniversary issues, death issues, new characters, and then we get into the gimmick covers as well. So all of this is going on while stories are trying to be written about the Marvel characters. Now it's Roy Thomas has taken over the things here, and he's very much into the golden. He is a comic book guy, and he's into the Hall of Fame or whatever it is. But he's been working since the '60s in the comic book industry. He worked as well for an editor of a fanzine called Alter Ego, which talked a lot about Golden Age and Silver Age comic books. So he's got he really also likes the pulp heroes. He likes like Doc Savage and the adventures of Fu Manchu. So he's got that old school history and started writing for Marvel, as I say, in the '60s. The material that he's doing here reminds me, I haven't read a ton of his Bronze Age Avengers, but it feels like that sort of book. It's and also like a Saturday morning cartoon type of book, whereas the plot is very thin, but it's a place where you get to have your colorful heroes face off against your colorful villains. A lot of fights, a lot of easy, as I say, plot lines. I want to take over the world type of plot lines. And there's not a great deal of story development. There is some character interaction, and I think as time goes on, there's a mix with, say, U.S. Agent and the Julia Carpenter Spider-Woman. They get a little bit more time in the book and a little bit more expansion on their character. But for the most part, it's a lot of fighting, a lot of easy resolutions, a lot of easy plot lines, A lot of new characters introduced as well. And about the new characters thing is that a lot of the creators were not interested in making new characters because they wanted to hold on to their ideas and possibly sell them over at Image or publish them through Image or one of these other startup companies, Malibu or something like that, because you weren't getting the kind of money that you on your heroes creating them for Marvel as you might if you created it for yourself and started to claim the royalties of that if that character took off. It's a double-edged sword because if you create somebody in Marvel, there's a greater chance that it's going to get some recognition as opposed to a smaller one. But with Image doing really well initially, a lot of the creators were thinking, I'm not going to give you my best ideas for new characters or new characters at all. But Roy Thomas does a ton of them in this particular series. I don't think that they're all that great, but they're there. So I will also say that because I don't know if it's because he's working with his wife Dan that the narrative flow is a lot smoother. I found that it was Roy Thomas is. I liked his stuff when he did Conan in the '70s. I thought that was good, and I had some fun with the late, early Bronze Age material he did with the Avengers, the bits that I've read. But I've also read stuff from the '90s by Roy Thomas, and I found it very choppy. There was not a clean narrative flow, and I found the dialogue was very forced. I don't see that here. I find that the dialogue is not exactly natural as it can be if you're, a superhero wearing all these costumes and stuff. But it's natural enough. It flows with the narrative. So the craft of creating a story, I think, is improved here in Avengers West Coast over some of the other material that he wrote in the '90s. Now, is that because his wife was along, or is he just having a better moment? I don't know. So it starts here at issue number 58, which is not a Roy Thomas issue, I don't believe, and then it moves on. I just wanted to point this one out because it's got Magneto and it's got the Dark Scarlet Witch, and that changes pretty quick. Because one of the first villains that comes into play for Roy Thomas is Immortus. Now, Immortus is one of the three Kang variants. There's Immortus, there's Kang, there's Ramatut. They're all the same guy at different points in time, and Immortus is the elder type of one. I'm not a big fan of Kang, and I'm not a big fan of time. Well, time travel can be a hit or miss, but I find these stories rather convoluted and they're not as enjoyable for me as they are for, say, some others. So seeing Immortus, but it's not really a time travel story. The Avengers do have to deal with Immortus because he's taken the Scarlet Witch and turned it into a Nexus battery, whatever that is. So they've got to take care of dealing with Immortus and his Legion of the Unliving. I got a lot of problems about a lot of this stuff, but the big thing here is by the end of it, Immortus is saying that he has been in control of the Scarlet Witch's life since the day she was born. He's been guiding her direction, the whole, including the work with the Vision, when the Vision took over the world via computer. That was, Immortus was nudging him that way so that the world would then, capture the Vision and break him down into various components. That was nudged by Immortus. This way, Scarlet Witch would start going off onto the deep end again, nudging, Immortus is putting all of these things into motion. He's helping her create these fictional children and having them. So he says he's responsible since Scarlet Witch has begun as a mutant, as a human, because he needs her as his Nexus battery again. And what I don't like about this is that it's taking all of that work that was done by specifically John Byrne in the last bit of West Coast Avengers, and even the stuff that was over in the Avengers regarding the Vision, and it's sort of negating it, saying that they don't have any stake in this. They did not create, this is not their situation, it's a situation that's been manipulated by Immortus. I don't like that. I don't. Sometimes when you embellish a story that's happened before by a character, that one's not so bad. But sometimes when you try to rewrite what's happening by putting in, actually it was me all along, and you're not responsible for your actions. I'm not down for that. I think John Byrne did a good job of the Scarlet Witch and going through her stages of mental breakdown until she was sort of this dark Scarlet Witch. And it would be an interesting story to say, okay, if you want to make her a hero again, if you want to redeem her, then you have to write a redemption story. But in this one, she's just by the end of the dealing with Immortus. Spoiler here: the Avengers win. Wanda's welcomed back into the fold as if nothing happened. All that bad attitude that she had and the dark Scarlet Witch that was developing, even though we just saw there with Magneto, hey, you're forgiven because you were somewhat manipulated by Immortus. So come on back and be a hero. I don't know if this was Roy Thomas saying, you know what, I don't care for what John Byrne had to write. I want to have Scarlet Witch as a hero, and it'll take me far too long and a convoluted story to bring her back. I want her back as a hero right now. Now, that could have been Roy Thomas, or it could have been the powers that be that said, you know, we want heroes because we're marketing heroes for toy lines, we're marketing them for movie possibilities, so we need our heroes to be heroes. And so whether or not Roy Thomas, chose to, sort of negate a lot of the John Byrne material, or if it was a request from head office to bring her back into the fold, whatever the situation is, all of that storyline that was developing with the Scarlet Witch is thrown out the window after they defeat Immortus, and she's back on the team. And again, as I say, not not really crazy about that. So this is the first character that we get that Roy Thomas creates, and it's called the Living Lightning. And he goes through a series of situations, finds the ancient cave and becomes the Living Lightning, and has a chance to face off against the original Human Torch. So this is issue number 63, the first appearance of the Living Lightning. I mention this because this is one of the few sort of spec books. As I said, a lot of new characters here. Living Lightning at least has showed up and continues to show up in the Avengers West Coast, and I think he's continued on since. So there's a little bit of possibility for this guy, but really he's just exactly as it's described. He's Living Lightning, delivers like electroshocks and things like that. I bring this one up, issue number what? This was 64. That was 63. This is 64. Only because it features. It's not a Roy Thomas story. Only because it features the Great Lakes Avengers, and I like the Great Lakes Avengers. I think there's again spec on those guys, and they don't show up too often. So here it is here with Cap fighting the original Human Torch. The next story arc for Roy Thomas involves the Grim Reaper and Ultron 13. A couple of surprises here in this first issue, but again, the story very much like the sort of, as I say, Saturday morning cartoon. Here are our big bad villains, and they have like a big plot. In the case of the Ultron 13, is like, I'm going to rule the world because I'm going to release a virus that is going to turn all humans into robots that I can then control. That's his big plan this time around. Grim Reaper joins his side, and we get to hear more about the Grim Reaper Simon Williams conflict, which we've heard many times. A couple of little surprises here. Get to see Necra and Mandrill show up for a brief period of time. And here he is. Here's Ultron 13 messing up with the crowd. Now, here's another spoiler. They defeat him. And you know how they get people to come back from being a robot is they shine an ultra red light on it. You'd think that, Ultron might have said, I'm going to test some of this and see what can stop this or whatever. So they figure out that, ultra red light will, at a certain frequency, will turn you back into a human. So all is good. Ultron is defeated. We have a cure for this virus for those that were infected. We can move on. All right, so this is issue number 69, and this is one of the ongoing storylines of this is what passes for character development, is a U.S. agent and Hawkeye having a go at it throughout the entire series. They hate each other. They never sort of reconcile the teammates. There was a U.S. agent story that was over in Avengers Spotlight, and I thought that had more character development and more interest than pretty much anything U.S. agent does in the Avengers West Coast. He's just always, looking for a fight. He's, that's not exactly who he is. I mean, I know he stands on the right, but even if you're standing on the right, there's times when there's rationale that can be imposed, and you can work with people as well. It's not, you don't have to be always standing alone and punching everything, which is how it's sort of read by Roy Thomas here. So this is nothing new. This is goes as I say goes on. But what it does, what this one does, is it introduces a couple of characters from the Pacific Overlords. Again, new characters. In this particular one, it's Jawbreaker, Kuroko, and Taifu. Jawbreaker's just a big guy that punches things. Taifu is Japanese for typhoon. So he does like a lot of waterworks, and Koruku is she can just turn invisible. No force field or anything of that, just turn invisible. Oddly enough, I find her to be the most interesting of characters because they actually gave her some character. Jawbreaker is just, I want to punch your face, and Taifu is just, give me back my children, and then he's, captured and ineffective for the rest of the storyline pretty much. But again, here are some new characters that Roy Thomas is introducing. And there's a couple of other characters from the Pacific Overlords that are also introduced into this story as well. Really, we got Cybertooth. It's got a big metal jaw that clamps down on people and stuff. And Spider-Woman shows up to join in, and with Spider-Man as well at some point in time. There's the crossovers are happening all over the place. And again, this is one of the things I was reading in a book recently, The Untold History of Marvel Comics, and one of the writers was saying, you know what, I could use some help. You're big on marketing and promotions. I need some marketing to help me out here with my stories, my books, because they're not selling as well as I would like them to. What do you suggest? And their answer was always, well, throw in a hot character. Spider-Man, Wolverine, Ghost Rider. There, problem solved. Get out of my house. You're bothering me. And that was the extent of the marketing that they just did not want to talk to the creatives. They had their own agenda and own thing that they were doing. So Roy Thomas is doing this. He's introduced these new characters. This is the Pacific Overlords. Spider-Woman shows up, and the Spider-Woman development is kind of interesting. But this is what, issue number 70. Yeah, so you get your Pacific Overlords happening here. And here is again introducing a new character called Peely, which is a lot like Magma. Okay, from over at the New Mutants. But it is an homage cover to X-Men 101. So there are some people that would collect it because of that. It also, as I said, it's the first appearance of this character, Peely, which won't have really much of effect at all. And it does feature Sunfire, which is not a common thing to have Sunfire in a book. So keep an eye out for that one. And I think this is the last of the Pacific Overlords, Irizumi. He's sort of like the tattoo man. He absorbs your image and then reflects your power back at you ×2. At least that's the sort of gist that you're getting. Again, it's kind of an ill-defined type of power, but here is Irizumi. This is a story that involves Dr. Demonicus, and he's arranged all these sort of people. And again, this is very Saturday morning. He raises a chunk of land in the ocean near Hawaii, and then declares it a sovereign island, his own personal island. And then immediately as this is happening, there's a representative of his in the UN, and the UN is saying, okay, we recognize your country, we accept you. It's like, it doesn't happen that fast, and I'm pretty sure that the United States of America would want to take a deeper inspection of any island that just sort of cropped up near Hawaii. I don't know, and your name is Dr. Demonicus? Yeah, I don't know that I want I'm going to heartily and readily accept you into the United Nations. And how did they get there that fast? You know how? Because it's a Saturday morning cartoon. So they're having a fight. The Avengers are fighting all of these Pacific overlords, and then the news comes in that it's a sovereign nation, and now the Avengers have no jurisdiction on this island because it's recognized by the United Nations, and now they're the trespassers. Get off! So away they go. Yeah, by this time the Avengers are no longer a part of SHIELD or the American government. They're working for the UN as well. That has a little bit of an effect throughout the stories, but not a ton. This is the 75th issue. It's an anniversary issue, and it features the Fantastic Four and the West Coast Avengers, and going back to Archon and Thunder's in there as well. It's illustrated by Herb Trimpe. Now, Herb Trimpe did a lot of work. I'm not a big fan of Herb Trimpe, but I can recognize his artwork from some of the Hulk issues that he did in the Silver Age, and maybe a little bit into the Bronze. He's the guy that illustrated the cover for Hulk 181, the first appearance of Wolverine. But he's done all this, and again, I don't know that he's ever been a fan favorite, but he's been steady working with Marvel for all this time. But his style just fell out of fashion, and as I said, this is those powers that be at the head office and said, you know what, I know you've been working for us and been putting stuff in for 20 to 30 years of all this artwork, but your art is no longer in vogue, so get out. We don't have any work for you. Roy Thomas, as I said, is an old school type of Marvel guy and working there. So he suggested, and I guess they went along with it, with Herb Trimpe to do some of the artwork. And he does this anniversary issue, and he does a couple other ones in the Avengers West Coast. But I gotta say, Herb Trimpe, he decided to try and change his look of his artwork to try and adapt to more of what's happening now with Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld and all of the line work by Todd McFarlane, this sort of heavier type of look. So he changed the style of his illustrations. And to me, it failed. Herb Trimpe says that he likes it and he's okay with it and he thinks he did well. But I've seen some of this artwork, especially in Fantastic Four Unlimited, and it is not. I would rather have the old Herb Trimpe style than this new thing. I applaud that he's trying something new, but it really is pale artwork, and it's not very good. This is not a good 75th anniversary issue. Move on to the Night Shift is the next thing. And again, the Night Shift is a funny group as well. And now I can't blame Roy Thomas for creating the Night Shift, but it's got all these characters that I think would work better as isolated characters. Like the Needle, for example, his whole thing was that he was beaten up by a bunch of young people, and he takes revenge on them by fighting them as the Needle, and then when he subdues them, to sew their mouths shut so they can shut up. Gypsy Moth has been a woman spurned. She has a different take on it. These are characters that don't, they're not interested necessarily in extortion, which is what the Hangman, the leader of the Night Shift in this one, is interested in. So why are you teamed up with you? It's just you're in a flashy costume with a little bit of a power. So let's put you up against the Avengers. And here's, again, this doesn't work because they're underpowered. So this story involves them getting, the Night Shift getting some powers from Satanish, so that they can bump up their power so that they can take on the Avengers. So this is a Night Shift Satanish type of story. And again, sort of, as I say, Saturday morning stuff. After that one comes to an end, we have the Galactic Storm. I'm not going to go too much on about the Galactic Storm. I've talked about it in other videos, but it is a 19-issue series spread out over about 5 or 6 different books: the Avengers West Coast, the Avengers proper, Captain America, etc., etc. And there are 3 chapters here. It's the Kree-Shi'ar War, which had some repercussions at the end, which was the chapter 19, which was in the Avengers proper, is the end book. That's really about the only book you really need to read. A lot of this stuff, and moving forward, I mean really moving forward from this point on, a lot of it is just fighting. Fight. There's 3 issues here that are devoted to the Galactic Storm. What was that? That was part 2, and this is part 9, and then there's part 16 as well. So there's 3 chapters to Galactic Storm here, and it's pretty much fight, with very little that you can add into the actual story itself. The whole galactic storm thing, I feel you could condense it down to about a 5 or 6 mini series and tell everything that you need to tell. There's just so much in these issues that is not important, and as I say, it's just like an endless fight that goes on. We get guests. We got. Oh, I should suppose one thing I should mention, and it's what this one here. Yeah, at the end of this, there's yet another new creation. A group called Death Web, and they're based on spiders. There's three of them. They make a sort of not quite a cameo. There's actually a couple of pages at the end of this particular run to lead you into the next one about these spider-like creatures. One's got like 8 arms and he's big and tough. One's called like I'm not sure their name, but he's like a trapdoor spider, so he teleports. And one spits webs at you. So there's spider-based characters called Death Web, but they're new. And the full story starts in the next issue, um, which is what 83, I guess. What is this? 84, 84. 83 and 84 is where you get to see Dead Web, and you get Spider-Man and Spider-Woman showing up. And again, that's another thing is to introduce Spider-Man into this because again he's a popular character, so you'll see a lot of popular characters moving forward. Really moving to the end of the line here. The luster of the boom area is starting to fade. The comic shops are still closing down for various reasons. People aren't buying as many books. So they're pulling out all the stops here. They're just filling it in with the guest stars that are the popular guest stars. You're going to start to see more gimmick covers, more first issues, more deaths, and it's just and they want wall to wall action type of thing. And the talent at Marvel is really starting to be depleted because they're either going to Image Comics or they're going to DC because of the way things are being run at Marvel, and yet Marvel is continually punching out like scads of titles every month, just trying to get as much money as they can. So Spider-Man shows up, and as I say, it just doesn't stop. This is a story that involves Wolverine for a couple of issues, and again, none of these stories are particularly good. I mean, they're not horrible, but they really are so Saturday morning type of storyline where there's the bad guy, he wants to take over the world, let's go beat him up. I mean, there are some interesting bits here and there, a little bit more earlier on, but as we're getting towards the end, it's really just almost like a free for all on a regular basis. Ultron comes back, and it's important to note that he comes back because where is it? Where's the first one? Is this 90? No. Ultron's back, and I want to show this one because there's yet another character that is created here, and that is called Alchema or War Toy. It's do you remember? I don't know if you remember Jocasta being based on the Wasp, Janet Van Pen's mind. Well, War Toy or Alchema is based on Mockingbird, Bobby Morse's character, and so she's created in this issue here is when she's first she makes a one panel show at the end, and this would be her first full appearance here, and this is this is her here. So we got War Toy running with Ultron. What do you know? They're gonna they send Ultron and War Toy off into space after a few issues, and that's how that's done. And 94, is this the only investment book? It's not even, wouldn't even call it, but it's the first official naming of War Machine. I mean, War Machine showed up in Iron Man, and this suit of armor has shown up before this, but this is the first time that he announces himself as being War Machine. James Rhodes as War Machine. It is a nice cover. I will give him that. That's a good cover of War Machine doing his thing. So this is the first time that he's actually called War Machine. So a lot of people regard this as the first appearance of War Machine. Crossovers continue. We got the Infinity Crusade for a couple of runs. Again, Infinity Gauntlet did really well, and Infinity War again sold pretty well. So why not? Let's just keep pushing that envelope and see how much we can get out of this. So, the Infinity Crusade it crossed over in a number of books with this little triangle up top to let you know that it's part of the Infinity Crusade. And so, we get another one of the Infinity Crusade. We finally get to issue number 100, and this has, look at all the stuff that this thing has. It's got a red foil cover. I don't think you can see much about it, but it's a red foil cover of stuff happening. It's issue number 100. It's the death of an Avenger, and there is a death of an Avenger. And it's got a price tag of $3.95. Now, all of the books prior to this, or the going rate of a comic book, was $1.25. So this is like 3 times the cost of a regular comic book. That's a significant amount. It's so $1.25 works out to about $2.50 in today's money, maybe a little bit more, $2.75. So this would be like about a possibly a $10 book for this book at that time. 64 pages, but it has all this sort of stuff, and that's partly what was going on in head office again. It's like a lot of these special covers, these gimmick covers. The idea was to increase the price because then you would increase your profit, and so they did a lot of these things moving forward. Because again, we're really heading towards bankruptcy in Marvel. We just want to get as much money as we possibly can. And Death was a big seller, right? We had the Death of Superman was like a phenomenal seller. So Death is a good selling point. We have the death of an Avenger here, and Mockingbird dies. Does anybody really believe Mockingbird is dead? I don't know. Did anybody really believe that Superman was dead, or that Tony Stark was dead? I forgot he was dead, but then he came back alive again. Well, how about that? He even had a funeral issue for him. Anyways, so this is the 100th issue. This is the red foil. Mockingbird dies. I will say this about the red foil and all these gimmick ones, that there are people out there now that are just collecting some of the gimmick covers, not because necessarily the stories and stuff. They're amused by the gimmicks, and this is a gimmick cover. Narrowing down here, there's this thing called Blood Ties that this crosses over with. This has got some X-Men and Avengers. This is like part 3 of 5 or whatever. There was no announcement that this was going to be here, and it just all of a sudden shows up as part 3 of 5 of Blood Ties. Okay. And then we get to the final issue of Avengers West Coast, at least Volume 1, issue number 102. And the Avengers decide to close up shop on the West Coast, take a vote, and it's closed down. And this is pretty much just a talking heads issue where they argue back and forth and finally break it down. Now, Tony Stark does step forward and say, this sort of Avengers time has passed because we've had so many differences with the Galactic Storm and blah, blah, blah. And our UN charter is this and that. He says, I'm going to take some of you guys away, U.S. agents, those that were part of the West Coast Avengers, and we're going to form a team called ForceWorks. So there is a series, I think it runs for about 17 issues of this following this, called ForceWorks, that features many of the same characters from West Coast Avengers in this new team of Iron Mans. And we'll talk about that one later. Okay, so that's it for the West Coast Avengers. And overall, I didn't think it was all that stellar a read. I think Roy and Dan Thomas had a couple of moments here and there, and I think their narrative flow was a little bit better than it has been. But it really feels like a Saturday morning cartoon with really low motivated villains that just want to take over the world. There's tons of people punching each other on a regular basis. It's a big battle. There's some new characters that come in, and Living Lightning is perhaps the most noticeable of notable of the new characters. But overall, I wasn't really that interested in this version of the Avengers West Coast. It's fine if you want that sort of Saturday morning read type of thing, but I prefer to have just a little bit more depth. And a little more characterization. There was some interplay between some of the characters, and there was attempts made to develop characters like Spider-Woman and U.S. Agent, especially moving on, but a lot of them just sort of fell into a block and stayed there and didn't do anything. And I gotta say, I wasn't happy with the fact that they didn't really do anything with Scarlet Witch other than say, we're gonna all that bad stuff that you were doing, all that sort of character development story, the route you were going. Well, we're just gonna put an end to that, but that's all we're going to do. We're not really gonna not gonna give you anything new. You just get to do Scarlet Witch stuff for the next 40 issues or whatever it is. So it's not really a recommended read. Now, as far as the collectors are concerned, there's tons to collect here. There's all those new characters. There's all the visitations and the guest stars of Wolverine and Spider-Man, and Darkhawk shows up in there, and Sunfire. Um, and there's an anniversary issue, which I'm not crazy about, the 75th one with Herb Trimpe art, but there's the gimmick cover on issue number 100, which is also the death. And there are people that collect the final issue, which would be 102. As far as spec is concerned, again, Living Lightning in issue number 63. Interesting, the Peely cover, where it's the homage to X-Men 101. It is the first appearance of Peely, and even though she's pretty much duplicating Magma's powers, the fact that it's on an homage cover, people would be, attracted to that particular cover, which may get some more play for Peely. And as I say, there's a ton of other little characters in here. I don't think any of the Pacific overlords are going to, make any big waves. Even Irizumi with the tattoo is a slightly different power than what everybody else seems to have, but it's just not all that interesting, and none of these characters are particularly interesting. Deathweb, I think that the image of that giant spider with the eight arms that can pound crap and everything, I think that would make an interesting toy, which is, but beyond that, I don't see much character. Maybe. I mean, there's so many of these new characters. Even I forgot even to mention there's a Russian batch that show up as well, and I can't remember all the names. And they're very duplicating powers that already exist. Whether or not a writer in the future is going to be able to take a look at one of these and actually turn it into a good, solid story, and people are going to take notice and say, "Hey, where did that eight-armed spider guy come from?" And it's like, it'll be here in Avengers West Coast because there's a lot of them. So that's your sort of collector spec books. The investment book, the War Machine, the first appearance of War Machine or first naming of War Machine. It's a nice cover. If you get it in a 9.8 and graded, all that sort of stuff, it'll look really sharp. But I'm not so sure that that's really going to turn into any kind of significant dollar amount moving forward. I don't think any of these books. I think even in the spec book, you're better off to buy it at a low price in a quality condition, and just hold on to that and see if like Living Lightning or something like that, or even the War Machine's been and gone. I just don't think that there's a lot of demand for that particular book in a 9.8 and spending hundreds of dollars on it. Not going to happen. You can still buy all of these books relatively at a relatively low price. Yeah, I did buy most of this at, actually, to be honest with you, I bought most of it in a 10-cent bin. Which happened in the later half of the 90s. The comic book shops had so many copies because you had to buy this stuff ahead of time, and then they sort of went out of. There was no return, so you would buy all these comic books, and then if people didn't buy them, then you were left with all these copies. And a lot of stores had to close their doors because they bought all of this stuff in advance, and then the bust started happening, and it's like, oh no, we've bought 200 copies of this and we've only sold 30, so we're not even making our money back, and they just ended up closing up shop and selling off tons and tons of inventory. So yeah, this was one of those places where somebody had bought, a comic book store had bought a bunch of inventory from some of these other shops, and I was getting a lot of this stuff at the latter half of the 90s at 10 cents a piece, including most of this West Coast Avengers. So it's still relatively inexpensive to buy, and I don't think there's a ton of investment here. Decent spec. So that's what I have to say about the Avengers West Coast. I'll possibly get a chance. I haven't completed my Force Works collection, but I've been really in no hurry to do so because I didn't find that a lot of this stuff was all that compelling. That's it for now. So be good to yourself and be good to others, and we'll talk again soon. I think the next time out, I'm going to finish off the Avengers proper run from 351 to 402, I think it is. All right. Talk to you later.